Hello classmates and Mrs. Delgertia, it's your boy Spencer Floyd, and I'm doing my literary project on Ayn Rand, who wrote both Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. So before we start, I'm going to give a little background information on Ayn Rand, and also what shaped her career and her ideology. Ayn Rand was born into Soviet Russia. As some of us might know, Soviet Russia is a collectivist society based off the collectivist ideals by Marx and Lenin and Engels. It's not a nice place to live. A lot of people died in secret prisons called the gulags. Other people just starved to death because of how bad it was run. With that in mind, Ayn Rand moved here before the start of World War II, bringing with her her hate of communism and collectivism, which is what she infused her works with. Now that we know a little bit about Ayn Rand, we'll get into her two novels I chose for today, Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. In both Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand propagates that individualism, or as she calls it, selfishness, is better than collectivism. It is a positive antithesis to collectivism. Now that's all well and good. However, I believe that her message is undercut by her portrayal of female sexuality. Fountainhead is one of Ayn Rand's first successful novels. It follows the young architect Howard Roark as he muddles through society that tries to keep him down. I'll go through three main figures in the novel: Howard Roark, Dominique, and a man named Tuhei. First, Howard Roark. Howard Roark starts off the book in architect school, and we see right away that he does not fit in. He's expelled for insubordination by the dean. The reason this is because Howard Roark has his new ideal for architecture that doesn't follow the societal norms of architecture during that time, the 1930s. He keeps refusing to do professors' works and follow their advice, leading to his expulsion at the end of his college career, right before he graduates. And he goes through a little dialogue with the dean. The dean goes, "Hey Howard, what are you going to do with your stupid little work that no one likes? How are you going to succeed in life? People are going to stop you." The dean says, "My dear fellow, who will let you?" And Roark responds, "That's not the point. The point is, who will stop me?" And I think this interaction really capitalizes on who Roark is as a man. He's an individual. He's a Promethean figure. And he's Rand's ideal man. He doesn't follow the societal norms. He strives to do his own thing. He paves his own path and lights his own trail. Now, things aren't easy for Howard throughout the novel. In fact, I would say things are extremely difficult. He lives in poverty through most of the novel because no one wants to buy his work. No one commissions him, and he keeps getting fired from his architecture jobs, which is really whack because Howard Roark is a very, very talented architect. Some might say he was the most talented architect in the world. People just didn't understand his vision. Now, he muddles away through menial labor. In fact, after he was fired from some of his consecutive jobs, he takes up manual labor in a granite mine. Now, I think this exemplifies that Howard Roark is a man's man. He holds masculine traits. And other critics have noted this too. One critic, Mary Schreller, says, "Central to the book is the equation of the tall building, which is phallic imagery tied closely with masculinity, especially the skyscraper, with masculine heterosexual virality." Now, what does this mean, you might say? Well, Howard Roark, like I said, is the ideal man. He's masculine. He takes what he wants without asking, and he does what he wants without asking either. So, what's special about him being an architect, about him doing manual labor, about his sexual encounters? Well, they all have one thing in common, which is his masculinity. Now, Rand ties masculinity, true masculinity, closely with her objective philosophy, which is that selfishness is good. Man should be able to take what he wants without asking. He should be able to do his own thing. He should be a Promethean figure. Howard Roark, the architect, strives to build skyscrapers and modern architecture, not following the Renaissance, the Gothic era, spires, none of that superfluous architecture. Now, each building kind of has phallic imagery involved with it. Skyscrapers, the big, long, erect buildings that scrape the sky, are tied closely with Howard because that's kind of what masculinity is to him. The skyscrapers don't ask whether they can be erect, They just are. Howard Roark is the hero of the novel, quite clearly seen, because he's contrasted with Peter Keating, who is a parasite. Both Howard and Peter went to the same architect school. Howard was actually the one who ghost wrote most of Peter Keating's work. Like a ghostwriter in rap or music, a ghost architect is the one that drafts the things and helps Peter with all of his work. Now, this trend continued through Peter Keating's career. While Howard was expelled, Peter graduated with honors. During their career, Howard Roark faced poverty while Peter Keating faced immense success. Peter Keating followed the trends of society. He was a parasite. He took the old and didn't transform it into the new. He used Howard's genius for his own work and didn't give him any credit. And for this, he was rewarded, which I really think is Ayn Rand's commentary on society, that geniuses and Promethean figures aren't rewarded for their work. Most are seen as crazy and looked down upon. However, she does envision a brighter future in which geniuses like Howard Roark are accepted. But we'll get there. Besides the success of Peter Keating, Howard Roark also has to face off against the media at large. Namely, a guy named Tuhei. Tuhei's a bit of an odd name, and Tuhei's a bit of an odd guy. However, Tuhei encapsulates the sheep mentality that Ayn Rand is driving against. Tuhei sees Howard as a threat to the norm. And to combat this threat, Tuhei uses his media influences and well-known name in the critical world in order to drive Howard Roark down to the ground. He's the reason why Howard Roark falls into poverty. He tarnishes his name throughout most of the novel because Howard Roark is a threat to the norm. Howard Roark is free, and freedom and individuality threatens Tuhei's world. To quote the novel, freedom: to ask nothing, to expect nothing, to depend on nothing. Now, this definition of freedom is important to the novel because expectation and dependency is what Ayn Rand despises. As I said, she grew up in communist Russia, where you had to depend on others and the government in order to survive. And in most cases, you ended up dying because of that dependency. Men like Tuhei depend on the masses and depend on others' opinion in order to thrive. Howard Roark is truly free because he doesn't depend on anyone except himself. When faced with poverty, he relies on his own hands in order to secure a paycheck. When faced with new ideas, he depends on his own mind in order to think of new ideas. This threatens Tuhei and society at large because they thrive and they function off of dependency. And Tuhei, quite clearly, with his collectivist ideals, is painted as the villain of the novel. The evil shadow and the evil cloud that permeates over Howard Roark's career. At the conclusion of the novel, Howard being the hero, he succeeds in his endeavors to be recognized and to have an impact on the world. At the end, Peter Keating uses his designs like he has earlier in life and builds what Howard Roark describes as a monstrosity of architecture. He used Howard Roark's designs and corrupted them in order to please the masses. Now, Howard, he felt both betrayed and disgusted by this, and he thought the only way to set this right was by blowing up the building, which he promptly did. Now, blowing up buildings is pretty illegal, I would say, and so Howard Roark was arrested on vandalism charges. And this is where the court scene of the novel comes up. And now, I thought this was a bit weaker than the rest of the parts because it felt like Howard, and therefore Ayn Rand, was trying to speak directly to the reader, and it kind of felt heavy-handed. However, throughout this jury proceeding, Howard Roark has a long oration about what it means to be an American and what it means to be an individual. And throughout this whole speech, the idea of a Promethean figure comes up. And for those who don't know, Prometheus was the Greek god who brought fire to man. Now, Howard Roark describes himself as a Prometheus because, like Prometheus, he's a trailblazer, and yet he was punished for his actions as a trailblazer. And he says that society at large, mostly parasites, they punish these Promethean figures, and yet they're able to thrive and grow based off of their own accomplishments. And so they kind of use them and throw them away. And this scene's all well and good, it just felt a bit heavy-handed to me. Another issue I saw with Fountainhead and later Atlas Shrugged, which I'll explain later, is the role of women within the novel. Now, Ayn Rand, being a woman, she wrote strong female characters, mostly. The issue I found with them is how she explains and brought forth their sexuality. Now, female sexuality has always been a bit controversial. Sexual perversion and violence is one of the main contradictions of Rand's objectivist philosophy within the novel. One critic says, Susan Love Brown, the first sexual encounter is known as the rape scene. That can't be good. From the time of the novel's publication, some readers have found a contradiction between Rand's views on freedom and the violence within the novel. The ambiguity arises from the way in which the scenes leading up to the event are constructed, and the sadomasochistic content of the novel, and Rand's views on gender and romantic relationships. Although Rand repeatedly denied any rape occurred, which I think he really did, this article concludes that a rape did occur and that Rand fully intended it to be so. Now, that's kind of damning to Rand and the novel. And let me explain a little bit the context. Howard Roark, as I said before, he doesn't ask permission to take. And in terms of sexuality, this is a bit of a danger zone, especially in today's environment. However, in the 30s, sexuality, especially for women, wasn't necessarily expressed in such a way that consent was given verbally, at least. Because, of course, they did then, but it was just a bit different than it is now. Quote, I'll quote the novel to give some context. When they lay in bed together, it was as if it had been an act of violence. It was the moment made of hatred, tension, and pain. And that's quoting Dominique, the main female character of the novel. And again, this is damning. However, Rand said herself that Dominique was inviting Howard to have sex with her. And again, this is the classic argument, well, she didn't say no. And from my personal views on this, I would say that it was a rape scene. And I would say that weakens the novel's point and Rand's overall objective philosophy, because you can't be free if rape is condoned. The rape between Howard Roark and Dominique weakens Rand's overall message and her objective philosophy. Because to be free, by definition, would most likely mean that you shouldn't be able to be raped. That's my point of view. And now, many critics have pointed out that Ayn Rand's objective philosophy might condone fascist tendencies. This is because Ayn Rand was influenced by a man named Stirner, an egoist, and Ayn Rand before has called herself an egoist as well. And Stirner once said that he views no property as private, only that he hasn't been able to take it yet. And this view on being able to take other people and property, because you're denying the freedom of others. And Ayn Rand she's fought back against these accusations, but it still remains an issue for her overall philosophy and the message of the book. Ayn Rand's next novel, what she considered to be her magnum opus, which I think is a mistake because it's a far worse novel than Fountainhead, is Atlas Shrugged. Atlas Shrugged, as described by one critic, is Ayn Rand began by infusing the ego-driven ethics of Nietzsche into the self-rationalization metaphysics of Aristotelism. And that seems a bit superfluous, and it is. Whoever wrote it, is superfluous. But let me break down that quote. Nietzsche, like Stirner, is an egoist philosopher who believes that selfishness is a virtue. He's the guy that said God is dead, so on and so forth. And Aristotle believed what is. A is A. And that's why she calls her philosophy objective philosophy, which I think is a bit egoist. Anyways, Atlas Shrugged is about two main characters, a woman named Dagny and a man named John Galt. John Galt is what Rand says is a super genius, an Ubermensch. John Galt organizes a strike of all the creative and intellectual figures of the world, causing a worldwide shutdown. This is because he feels like the smart people, the intellectual class, is being used and abused by governments around the world. And this is where I think the weakness of Atlas Shrugged comes in, because Ayn Rand tries to incorporate her objective philosophy into capitalism and into government structures, and I think she falls short in that endeavor, because to sum up Atlas Shrugged, it's pretty much screw the poor people, you should have just been smarter like us. I think that's the main message of Atlas Shrugged. But throughout the novel, she still incorporates her egoist and objective philosophy, but as it pertains to business and government structure. Dagny is the main female protagonist of the novel. She represents part of the intellectual class that Rand thinks should rule the world in a technocracy. She runs a railway system, and it might sound boring because it kind of is. And her main struggle throughout the novel is finding who this John Galt is and where he lives, because his worldwide shutdown is damaging her own business. Business. Big business. Ayn Rand loves big business. Throughout the novel, Ayn Rand says quite explicitly that big business is good, it's awesome, and whoever has money deserves it. To paraphrase Ayn Rand, she said something along, if a man damns money, he earned it dishonestly. If a man loves money, he earned it honestly. And that's kind of not right, I would say. And I think most people, especially now, would agree with me. Who is John Galt? That's the main question of the novel. John Galt is a super genius who organizes everyone to strike and bring down the world economy, because you can't do it without those darn intellectuals. John Galt organizes a sort of commune society, which I think is a bit ironic, in the middle of the Rocky Mountains. He calls it Galt's Valley, Galt's Gorge. And while there, he brings all the intellectuals and all the smarty pants to one place, and they live in a perfect utopian society, which many have criticized, like Clardy Allen. Clardy Allen says, nestled in a bit more than 100 pages, this alternate world is really her vision of a utopia, the ideal realization of what human existence could be and should be like. Now, here's where we raise more issues with her objective philosophy. She still propagates that one should be selfish. If you're smart, you should use it. If you're smart, you should make money. But by hoarding all the smart people into one place and excluding everyone else, it seems as though she supports what many other fascists and many other people have supported, like Adolf Hitler, which is the idea of the Übermensch, the Superman. It's the fact that she thinks that some people are just worth more than others, and that if you're worth more, if you're smarter, if you're richer, then you deserve things. You deserve to rule the world. And that's what happens at the end of the novel. John Galt and his posse end up running the world in a type of technocracy. The smart run the government, everything's perfect and utopian. But where does that leave the common man, you might ask? Well, menial labor, the hands, the brunt, the back of the organization. And I think many rightly have criticized that this is what leads to fascism, which is a no-go in many people's opinions. So that's where I think the book falls short. Besides the sexual perversion of the novel, which I'll get to later, is that the book is a one woman's roadmap to fascism, it seems like. Dagny and John Galt represent the Übermensch, the intellectuals of Atlas Shrugged, and through them we see the progression of Rand's own philosophy, her egoist mentality, and her progression and propagation of selfishness. Quote, "Never think of pain or danger or enemies a moment longer than is necessary to fight them." And what that's basically saying is that lions don't think of the opinions of sheep, a very egotistical perspective on life. And of course, she tries to meddle in right-wing capitalist mentalities into her novel, which is why Ayn Rand is seen as one person said, a gateway drug to the far right. Quote, "What greater wealth is there than to your own life and to spend it growing?" What she's saying is that she wants you to grow as a person because that's the greatest wealth, which is kind of contradictory to what she says, which is money is awesome throughout the novel. But here we are again, at a crossroads of sexual perversion and violence, which seem to permeate Ayn Rand's novels. Quote, "A man's sexual choice is the result and sum of his fundamental convictions." Now, let's take that to heed, shall we? In her previous novels, Howard Rourke rapes someone, but he's Ayn Rand's ideal man. So is that saying that the ideal man takes women and rapes them? I think that is what she's saying. In this novel, gender and sex are also twisted. Dagny, which many have said to be a strong woman, she ends up becoming a maid and housewife of this John Galt. And for what many have said to be feminist novels, seeing as though they bring up strong female roles, this seems to go against them. And it also seems to go against her main theme of egotism and objective philosophy. Because if your main goal is growing, and you're already the tycoon of a railroad company, as Dagny was, why would you become a housewife to John Galt? I think, in combination with these two books, there's useful things to draw off of. Egotism, in its base form, can be good. It's good to better yourself, and it's good to look out for yourself. It's good to strive for your own goals. However, it's not good to just take what you want without asking, and it's not good to use your own strength and your own intellect in order to oppress others, whether they be the lower class, as in Atlas Shrugged, or women, as we see in Fountainhead. And this is where Ayn Rand fails in her novel. She succeeds in supporting that selfishness is good. We can see that through Howard Rourke. But she fails to account for the sexual violence in her novels and the damage that can do to her own philosophy and the world at large. Thank you. Spencer Floyd is done.